Okay, welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine standing in front of a classroom of starving children in this really impoverished Colombian neighborhood,
Okay.
and your mandated curriculum, the thing you are required to teach, means you have to teach them the English word for croissant,
Oh, wow.
right? Do you force them to memorize a reality they've literally never lived, or do you just throw out the textbook entirely?
I mean, it's a super provocative scenario, but it honestly gets right to the heart of what we're dissecting today. We are looking at language not just as, a system of words, but really as the primary battlefield for cultural belonging.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And this whole debate stems from a pretty extensive interview with Roger, who is this bilingual Colombian-American educator.
Right.
His life is just this continuous series of cultural clashes. So we're tracking his journey from caring for his paraplegic uncle in Florida, using English purely as this raw survival tool, to eventually teaching that exact same language in the really rough, marginalized neighborhoods of Medellin.
And the central question that his experiences sort of force us to confront is this. Is language acquisition fundamentally this immersive sociocultural process driven by real-world context? Or is it an academic process that strictly requires, the mastery of theoretical grammar and standardized structures to actually be scalable and effective?
And my stance here is that immersive learning and real-world context are the absolute, irreducible engines of language acquisition. Like when you divorce language from the cultural reality of the learner, you aren't teaching.
Okay, but
You're really just forcing them to memorize meaningless noise.
well, and I contend that while yes, emotional connection and cultural context are excellent motivators, they are fundamentally insufficient for actual mastery. Traditional theoretical grammar structures are the necessary foundation.
The foundation?
Yes, the foundation. Without that academic architecture, a learner's proficiency remains frankly fragile, unscalable, and just ultimately limited.
Okay, well then let's go straight back to that classroom in Golondrinas. That really impoverished neighborhood in Medellin.
Right, the croissant example?
Exactly. So Roger walks in there as a new teacher, and he's relying on the traditional academic method. He brought in flashcards and props to teach this totally standardized breakfast vocabulary list.
Yep.
Words like croissant, baguette, sushi, and he asked the kids to repeat them. But there was this one young student, Santiago, who was just entirely lost, completely disconnected.
Right. And when Roger pressed him, kind of correcting him for not engaging with the exercise, Santiago explained that the only thing he actually ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner was agua panela, which is a traditional sugarcane drink, and bread.
Which is, look, undeniably a heartbreaking moment for an educator.
It's heartbreaking, yeah, but critically, it's a total cognitive failure of the academic approach. I mean, in linguistics, we talk about schema theory, right?
Sure, the mental frameworks.
Exactly. The idea that you can only process new information if you have an existing mental framework to attach it to. Santiago literally did not have the cognitive schema for a croissant. When Roger tried to force this academic abstraction onto him, the acquisition just failed. Santiago didn't need a vocabulary list. He needed the language to map onto his actual reality and his survival. Okay, I hear you, but that makes sense in a vacuum. Look at the reality of what actually failed there. You are conflating a failure of curriculum selection with a failure of academic structure itself.
Am I?
Yes. Teaching the word croissant to a child who relies on agua panela is absolutely a contextual mismatch. I can see that. But bad vocabulary selection does not invalidate the necessity of structured grammar.
But it shows how disconnected the structure is from the human.
Not necessarily. Let's look at another data point from the exact same source material. Roger grew up entirely bilingual, right?
Right. He had the ultimate immersive upbringing.
Exactly. He lived the dream of organic immersion, navigating between English and Spanish his entire life. Yet, when he enrolled in university to study education, they handed him a standardized diagnostic test requiring him to conjugate 100 verbs into the past tense.
Oh, right.
He completely bombed it. I mean, he failed a fundamental structural assessment of a language he natively spoke.
Okay, but does failing a rote memorization test really mean he didn't know the language? Or does it mean the test is just, measuring the wrong thing?
I think it means we have to understand the difference between implicit and explicit knowledge. Roger had implicit knowledge.
Meaning he could use it.
Right, he could order food, he could converse fluently, but he lacked the explicit, declarative knowledge of how his own language actually functioned. That is a massive academic deficiency.
I wouldn't call it massive.
It is when you're entering an academic or professional sphere. The global education system relies on core standardized benchmarks like the A1 and A2 proficiency levels in the European framework because unstructured immersion simply does not scale.
But it does work for communication.
Sure, but it doesn't provide rigorous, measurable outcomes. If a native, bilingual speaker cannot pass a basic structural assessment, how on earth can we expect a second language learner to achieve reliable professional proficiency without that exact structure?
Okay, I have to stop you there because the data from the university test tells a completely different story. It proves that teaching the mechanics of language is not the same as teaching the language itself.
How so?
Well, look at the source material detailing the story of that highly intelligent, super wealthy American entrepreneur, the guy who paid top dollar for elite private Spanish lessons.
Right, the executive.
Yeah, he had the structure, he had the explicit grammar instruction you're advocating for, and yet he instantly forgot the words the moment the lesson ended. Why?
Let me guess, you're going to say he lacked context.
No, he lacked what linguists call integrative motivation. He had no real desire to integrate into the culture. There were no stakes, no survival need.
That he paid for the lessons.
Paying for it isn't the same as needing it to survive. Language is not a math equation you just solve on a whiteboard. It is a mechanism of exposure. Think about how Roger eventually decided verbs should be taught.
You mean the cooking verbs?
Yes, not through a Xerox list of 100 conjugations, but through embodied cognition. Words like dice, slice, mix, and stir.
Okay, but
You don't teach those by having a student write them on a chalkboard. You hand them a knife and a vegetable in a kitchen. As they physically slice the tomato, the motor cortex pathways in their brain fire in tandem with the linguistic centers.
it's a fun exercise, sure.
It's more than fun. The physical action encodes the vocabulary infinitely deeper than passive visual reading. Teaching syntax without culture or context is like, it's like giving someone a perfectly tuned instrument but no sheet music. They know how to press the keys, but they have absolutely no idea what song they're supposed to be playing.
Okay, the instrument analogy sounds incredibly poetic, I'll give you that. But let's talk about the actual logistics of this.
The logistics?
Yes. Pure immersion and embodied cognition are logistical impossibilities for the vast majority of the world. We do not have infinite kitchens, infinite vegetables, and infinite time to teach every single verb through a physical activity.
We can simulate it, though.
Barely. Education has to be a structured, standardized system, precisely so we can reach the masses. Furthermore, this sort of romanticized idea of organic immersion often fails completely when left to its own devices.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, human nature is wired to avoid friction, and the source provides a brilliant example of this. Remember the university student who goes on an exchange program to the United States explicitly to learn English?
Oh, yeah.
That is the ultimate immersive setup. She's in the culture, she has the context, but what happens? She ends up living with a Peruvian family.
Right?
The friction of the English-speaking world was just too intimidating, so she retreated into a comfortable cultural bubble. She returned a year later with a lovely Peruvian Spanish accent and zero English.
Well, she didn't try.
Exactly. Without the enforced, standardized guardrails of traditional schooling, learners naturally default to the path of least resistance. Structure forces the engagement that organic immersion allows you to avoid.
But that's exactly the point. That exchange student didn't fail because immersion doesn't work. She failed because she wasn't actually forced to immerse. She had the luxury of avoiding the friction.
But most students do have that luxury.
Not the ones learning for survival. Most students who are learning a language for true cultural belonging aren't in a comfortable exchange program where they can just retreat to the living room.
Right. They usually have a choice to disengage.
But what if they don't? Take Roger's uncle, Gonzalo. He's a military captain who survives this horrific helicopter crash and ends up paraplegic. Roger, as a young teenager, moves to Florida to help care for him.
Yeah, that's a really intense situation.
Suddenly, English is no longer an academic exercise in a workbook for him. Roger is the only one who can truly communicate between his Spanish-speaking uncle and the English-speaking medical staff.
which is an incredibly high-stakes environment.
It is task-based language teaching in the most extreme, trauma-driven setting imaginable. He is translating complex medical needs, navigating his uncle's physical pain, and engaging in, mature survival communication.
Sure.
No textbook, no standardized A2 curriculum can simulate the urgency of translating for a paraplegic family member in a hospital. The brain prioritizes what it needs to survive. That context dictates language mastery far more effectively than a verb table. And it goes beyond just trauma. It dictates the nuances of human connection, like humor.
Humor is notoriously difficult to translate.
Exactly. Because humor is pragmatics. It's entirely cultural. The source notes how American sarcasm differs vastly from Latino sarcasm.
Right.
Latino sarcasm tends to be more playful, sometimes more sexualized, whereas American sarcasm is incredibly dry. Or how a joke made in an English-speaking gym completely misses the mark if the cultural context isn't perfectly mapped.
Very true.
You cannot learn sarcasm on a chalkboard. You only acquire it by actively navigating the clashes between these different worlds.
Okay, that's an intense and fascinating reality. And you're right, necessity absolutely accelerates learning. I won't deny that. But we have to look at the dark side of that raw, unstructured cultural clash.
The dark side?
Yes. You are framing this immersive bilingualism as an absolute gift, right? This magical bridge to human connection. But bringing an outside language into a new context can actively prevent belonging.
Wait, how could knowing more language isolate you?
Look at what happened when Roger moved back to Colombia. He wasn't celebrated for his bilingualism. He was relentlessly bullied by his own classmates.
Oh, because of the English.
Yes. They literally called him El Huichor, the weird one, because he could speak English fluently and understand the teachers while his peers were still struggling with basic vocabulary. He was viewed as a threat.
But that's just kids being kids, though.
No, it's more than that. The raw possession of the language without a structured academic environment to normalize it for everyone else became a profound social burden for him. It alienated him.
But the alienation didn't come from the English language itself. It came from the insecurity of the tribalistic environment he was thrust into.
Which is exactly my point. A standardized educational system serves to normalize the learning process. It creates a shared struggle.
I don't know if I agree that standardization fixes bullying.
It mitigates the isolation. When an entire classroom of students is progressing through explicit grammar lessons together, the language becomes a shared academic pursuit. When it's just raw, unstructured cultural collision, you get jealousy, bullying, and isolation. Relying purely on organic cultural immersion completely ignores the very real friction of human tribalism. Structure provides safety.
Structure provides the illusion of safety. If we recognize that cultural integration is fraught with bullying and tribalism, the solution isn't to retreat into the sterile mathematical safety of a grammar workbook.
Then what is it?
The solution is the educator. The teacher is the actual bridge between these worlds.
Passionate teachers are wonderful, sure, but passion is subjective. You cannot systematize or scale an individual teacher's charisma.
You can't scale it, but you absolutely cannot succeed without it. Consider Roger's social-emotional moment in that wealthy Medellin school.
The moment of silence thing?
Yeah, the administration had mandated these standardized 5-minute moments of silence, a classic, rigid, systemic requirement. And Roger throws it out and improvises.
Okay.
He projects a picture of a mountain on the board and asks the students to imagine bringing something or someone they deeply love into that landscape. He says he would bring his mother. Another student says a dog.
And this is where the distracted student chimes in.
Right. A student who had previously been unreachable, constantly daydreaming, totally disconnected from the academic structure, he raises his hand and asks to bring his grandmother, Maria.
Yeah.
When Roger asks where she lives, the boy reveals she passed away and opens up about how safe she made him feel. In linguistics, we talk about the affective filter, the emotional wall that prevents a student from absorbing language when they feel anxious or disconnected.
And he broke through it.
Roger obliterated that filter. Suddenly, this rowdy class of 6th graders transforms. Another student brings up an uncle who died of cancer. A mandated 5-minute exercise turned into a 2-hour deep connection where the students felt entirely safe. When the affective filter drops, cognitive openness skyrockets.
It's a beautiful moment of human connection.
I am not discounting the psychological value of emotional safety.
But we must rigorously question the academic efficacy of these improvised moments. Let's look at how Roger's teaching career actually started. It didn't start with some grand pedagogical philosophy about the affective filter. It started because a physics teacher showed up to the school drunk.
A uniquely immersive beginning to a career, you have to admit.
Immersion by default. Roger, who was just a ninth grader struggling in physics at the time, steps in to teach the English class to younger students in exchange for better grades. And what is his methodology?
He gets them out of the classroom.
Right. He takes the kids outside to an open farm, tells them to speak no Spanish, and has them run around picking up blue leaves.
And the students were thrilled. They engaged physically and mentally, asking why they couldn't always learn that way.
Of course they loved it. It's kinesthetic learning. It breaks the spatial constraints of a boring classroom. But let's be intellectually honest here. It is entirely anecdotal and unstructured.
It worked, didn't it?
It is a fun Boy Scout adventure, but does it build complex syntax? You can run around picking up blue leaves all day, but eventually you have to write a university thesis. And what happened when Roger reached that pinnacle of academic rigor? He wrote his research thesis in English. And because the system he was in relied so heavily on passion rather than formal standardized proficiency, only 3 people in his entire faculty could even comprehend it.
That just highlights the failure of the faculty's instruction, not Roger's.
No, it highlights that passion is a spark, but grammar and theoretical structure are the engine. You can have all the mountain pictures, affective filters, and blue leaves in the world, but if you do not understand the explicit morphological and syntactic mechanics of the language, you cannot operate in a professional, academic, or highly complex linguistic environment.
I think you're overstating that.
Am I? He was forced to translate and defend his work in both English and Spanish precisely because his evaluators lacked the theoretical foundation to assess him. Standardized rules are what ensure that when you engineer a complex thought, the person on the other side actually comprehends the architecture of what you are saying.
Okay, let's talk about what linguistic architecture actually means to a real learner. Think about the kids in Roger's recycling story.
The 3rd grader?
Yes, young Martin. A 3rd grader who missed Tuesday classes because he was out working with his parents, recycling animal bones and leftover restaurant food to sell to dog food companies.
A brutal reality.
Absolutely. When you are a child living in that grueling reality, the architecture of an English sentence in a standardized textbook is completely alien. It is irrelevant noise.
I agree that it can feel alien.
But when Roger told Martin to make a project about his actual reality, his recycling work, Martin fully engaged. The architecture has to reflect the life of the learner. If the grammar doesn't serve the immediate, visceral reality of the student, it literally vanishes from their mind.
Look, I completely agree that using Martin's recycling as the topic is brilliant pedagogy. Use the recycling. Use the cooking verbs in the kitchen.
See, we agree.
Hang on, I'm not finished.
Underneath that contextual veneer, the teacher must rigorously enforce the grammar, the syntax, and the standardized vocabulary.
But the context has to come first.
If you don't enforce the structure, you end up with learners who can order a coffee or talk about their emotional day, but who cannot write a professional email, cannot pass a university entrance exam, and remain fundamentally locked out of the upward mobility that language is supposed to provide.
But that implies upward mobility only happens through passing standardized tests. Think back to the wealthy American entrepreneur.
The guy who forgot his Spanish?
Yeah, he already had upward mobility. He had all the resources and academic structure money could buy. What he lacked was the survival instinct, the deep, integrative motivation that a child like Martine or a teenager like Roger translating for his uncle Gonzalo inherently possessed.
I'm not denying the power of motivation.
But it's everything. The brain prioritizes what it needs to survive and belong, not what a curriculum dictates.
Which brings us full circle to the Peruvian family exchange student. Her brain prioritized exactly what it needed to survive emotionally, the comfort of a shared culture. And so her brain actively rejected the friction of the English language she was there to learn.
Well, she wasn't forced to use it.
Exactly. This is why the academic structure is absolutely non-negotiable.
It acts as the necessary guardrail against our very human instinct to avoid the uncomfortable, exhausting friction of stepping into a new culture.
I think we are arriving at the crux of our disagreement here.
I think so too.
To summarize my position, language is ultimately a messy, visceral human endeavor. It is the primary tool we use to navigate the fierce struggle for cultural belonging. When we rely on schema, on cultural immersion, and on passionate teaching that lowers the emotional barriers, we build actual bridges between worlds.
Right.
We move beyond forcing starving kids to memorize croissant and connect with the reality of agua panela. That deep, contextual connection is what fosters true acquisition and genuine belonging.
And to summarize my position, while human connection and cultural context are undeniably powerful for motivation, they are insufficient for actual mastery.
We definitely disagree there.
We do. The structured, theoretical approach to grammar and standardized benchmarks is the only mechanism that ensures learners achieve reliable, scalable proficiency. Without the rigorous academic tradition to guide it, unstructured immersion leaves learners academically deficient, easily isolated in comfortable cultural bubbles, or, ironically, bullied for possessing a raw skill they cannot systematically share.
Well, it seems we are in total agreement that the ultimate goal of learning a language is to effectively communicate and navigate the intense clashes between different cultural worlds. We both see language as the necessary bridge between these spheres.
We do. Where we maintain our substantive disagreement is on the foundation of that bridge. You believe it must be rooted in immersive, contextual reality and the passion of the educator, while I maintain it must be built upon the rigorous theoretical traditions of academic structure.
Bridging cultures through language is an endeavor of immense complexity. There is so much more to explore in Roger's story and in the broader material regarding the profound intersections of education, culture, and our fundamental identity as we move through the world.
The material certainly challenges our assumptions about what it takes to truly understand and be understood by another human being.
It really does. So when you step into a new culture, do you learn the rules of the road by memorizing the manual or by getting behind the wheel? We'll leave that for you to decide. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.